So today I have a guest, Jennifer Nurick. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Did I pronounce your name properly?
Yeah, you did.
Hey. It's always such a thrilling moment. Welcome to Mind Valley, and thank you for joining us. Where Jennifer is calling from, she's in Australia. It's 2 a.m. So I'm really so grateful to you. And I know sometimes we get to work super late because we have people from all around the world. And thank God the planet is the planet is so big, so vast, and we are all in different parts of the day. So before we start the conversation, I want to introduce you to Jennifer officially. So Jennifer is an experienced psychotherapist, counselor, and energetic healer who is a huge self-love advocate, a listening ear, and a hold of space for transformation and healing. Jennifer, to be honest, when I was reading your bio, I was catching the thought that I actually, we usually, when we introduce each other, we introduce with some kind of facts, dry facts. Here's my education, here's this, here's that. And I read so much about what you care about, what's your mission, what's your passion. So I think it's quite an interesting take on how we perceive ourselves as professionals, it's just not a very common thing to share the passions. It's usually common to share the facts. So back to your bio. Sorry, I had to make this little sidestep. So Jennifer, Jennifer has a master's in counseling and applied psychotherapy from Janssen Newman Institute, Sydney, and is a qualified kinesiologist, Reiki practitioner, and energetic healer. Through a unique combination of psychotherapy and spiritual healing, Jennifer combines her experience in these fields to provide unique and holistic support for her clients in their healing journey. She supports people who feel overwhelmed by self-criticism, stress, sadness, anxiety, doubt, and fear to become more accepting of who they are and break through their own inner glass ceiling. Jennifer is passionate about helping her clients access their own inner wisdom as they navigate life's ups and downs, grow in self-compassion, have a better relationship with themselves and others, and change patterns that are no longer helpful. She loves helping people find more joy in life and be more authentically in the present and fulfilled. Jennifer is the founder of Psychotherapy Central, ambassador to a Sound Life charity, the Embody Lab, and president of the International Energetic Healing Association. A lifelong learner, author, and regular facilitator, Jennifer leads international transformational retreats and writes accredited courses, ebooks, and blogs. She's a mom of 2 beautiful children and practices from her studio in Sydney and online. So I believe you are there right now, right?
That's a long bio.
It's okay. When I do interviews, I always feel a little bit conscious when my bio is being read out for so many reasons. First of all, it's so hard, it's so strange, I guess, to hear your own story told back at you. But I really appreciate because it does highlight what you're passionate about. And I heard, the motive for me was self-love and appreciating oneself. And I think this, it's my personal opinion that this is the curse of our contemporary society, the lack of self-love, even if it might seem the opposite because we are, egocentric and obsessed with approval and comments and likes and everything. But I think that actually comes from the lack of self-love.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think your passion is really important.
And a big segment of the healing process. A big part of the healing process is around self-love, and that segues really well into the inner child work, because so much of the inner child work is really about how do we do self-love. So I read an interview by the Dalai Lama a few years back, and somebody from the West asked the Dalai Lama, how do we work with self-hatred? And the Dalai Lama was kind of like, what do you mean? Can you explain what you're talking about? And they kind of explained it a bit more deeply, when it's when you think about yourself and you don't like yourself and you don't like the way that you are in the world and you don't like the way that you look. And the Dalai Lama was like, wow, we don't have that same concept. And it just shows that, I loved how you said that it's part of our culture, that actually it doesn't exist in the same way in other cultures as it does in our culture. And so a big part of healing in the West particularly is around how do we love ourselves in a way that's manageable for us, and the inner child model lends itself to that really well, I think.
Yes, the inner child or relationship, healthy healing relationship within child is the topic of our today's conversation. But since we started maybe a little bit on the side note, to a degree, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question in a slightly different direction. You just mentioned self-hate, and I find it a very interesting twist to our conversation. I've heard, well, when I talk about self-love, I heard people ask me, but isn't being highly self-critical good for you? Because when you criticize, you get the motivation to change and to become better, to the point where the person used exactly the same words, which were a little shocking to me, that, you know, self-loathing, even self-hate, and actually referred to stoics, with whom I have some reservations, that they actually encouraged self-criticism and self-hate to degree. What would you say to that kind of comment, that self-criticism is actually good for you because it makes you evolve?
My bar is, if I had a child who is 5 or 6 years old, would I be okay to say it to my own child? And so if I'm going to say, if we're going to be critical to a child and use criticism to make them do something, I just think that as we parent, most people listening to the show will be parenting quite consciously, that there's something in our body that just knows that using criticism in order to make a child do something isn't really appropriate. And so why would it be okay then to do something different to our adult selves? So for me, that's the bar. If I wouldn't use it with a child, then why do I think it's okay to use it for myself?
You know, it's interesting. My background is a little peculiar. I grew up in Soviet Union, actually consciously grew up in it. So I remember the mentality of that society. But I think it's actually the Western society probably can also relate. We have this idea of going through hardships to achieve anything valuable. So this part of going through something very incredibly unpleasant to reach anything worthy is kind of almost part of our cultural story. So I guess the criticism is akin to that, because I know that in the Soviet society, public criticism and judgment was actually part of the story, and it was supposedly encouraging you to do better next time.
So it's through shaming is there shaming
in a way?
There's like shaming, yeah. And so then that brings up all of Brene Brown's work around, you know, the use of shaming. And, you know, we know that shaming, it collapses us energetically. It doesn't expand us. And it's the same with children. When we shame them, they collapse. They take on this different posture. They go down. It's not an uplifting thing. It's like being pushed forward, being beaten by the stick. It's for me, it links into shame. Now, can we grow out of harsh experiences? Of course, you know, there's post-traumatic growth, and there's a lot of research around post-traumatic growth and how helpful that can be. But do we want to throw ourselves into traumatic experiences in order to grow? Most people would say not. It's more like, let's just learn through the natural traumas that life throws at us, which just living a life is going to happen. So what I'm hearing you say is kind of, is the inner critic, kind of the monkey on your shoulder talking in your ear, is that useful to push you towards your goal? Yeah. So for me, there needs to be balance. So if that inner critic is too loud, is too vicious, is too much, then for myself, I go out of balance. And I see that with my clients as well. And it become where it becomes stifling, where you're too afraid to move forward because we're too afraid of being shamed. We're too afraid of making a mistake. And then it stifles creativity. So so for me, there needs to be a balance. It's like that voice is often there, and we often don't need to increase the loudness of the volume of that voice. It's often loud in most people. And so for most people, it's how do we raise the volume in the loving part, the loving parent part. So I call it the loving parent. And that's the part that we need to turn up the volume, and usually turn down the volume a bit on the inner critic, so that we can take risks without feeling like we're going to be shamed and without shaming ourselves. And the issue with our society and our friends and our culture shaming us is that then that gets internalized. So then we don't need our friends and our culture to shame us, because we're too busy with shaming ourselves before anyone else gets the chance to. Mm-hmm. So for me, I see a healthier culture and society developing from having a much kinder, loving voice. Yeah, having checks on that, but the majority being loving and supportive as opposed to critical. Mm-hmm. Is it for you?
I am slightly playing devil's advocate right now, because I'm throwing at you the hard questions I've been getting from people, so to learn.
So I like think about it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, well, because of course I agree. I'm a huge advocate of self-love, but I also sometimes don't know how to answer people, so that's why I'm going to use the chance to talk to a professional. But I want to ask another question, which I do hear also quite a bit, is so when is it too much? The kind voice. I think we're so scared of, especially in our very exhibitionist society, we're scared to come across as too self-obsessed. So when is that self-loving too much? When is it going to cross the border to selfishness? Or
these are great questions, and I'm glad you're asking them, and keep them coming, because these are the human dilemma that we're sitting in, right? And again, I go back to, okay, if I have a child and they've got this chocolate cake for their birthday, and the child just wants to eat the whole chocolate cake. Now, me as their parent, I know that if my child eats that whole chocolate cake, number one, they're going to feel really sick quite quickly. It's not healthy for them. And there's other people there to share it with. So I'm going to say something like, let's have one piece and see how you feel after one piece. If you want more, maybe we'll have two, and let's see how you feel after two. And so it's a negotiation between those parts, right? And that's what child work is negotiating between the parts. So we have that critical voice, and that critical voice often, underneath it, it's often protective. So it's often trying to protect us from being shamed. It's trying to protect us from failure. It's often underneath it, it's trying to protect. Mm-hmm. So what happens is when we turn around and we face that voice and we actually engage with it, and we start to find out, what is it really frightened of? What is it really wanting for us? Often it's wanting to keep us safe. So it might be really critical because it doesn't want me to speak in public, because it doesn't want me to fail in public. And so it wants me to stay small and stay at home and not do whatever that thing is, so that I stay safe. So that's part of us. And then there's this other part that is more of a loving parental voice. And so in some of us, we have a model for that, and some of us we don't. We need to cultivate it a bit more. But it's more about growing that part, and then at least being able to have a conversation between the two. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. It does. And it makes me think in a different direction from my original line of thought. We have announced that this conversation is going about the inner child work. So I want to get to that now. And Jennifer, I have to tell you that occasionally I bring people on from the audience to come and ask their question. I saw there were questions coming in, so it's happening, but not yet, guys. No, I'm too interested in this conversation. So I'll have my questions first. And the question is about the inner child, the definition of the inner child, and a little bit of a context is that very often we hear, well, at least in personal growth and transformation, we hear inner child being brought up into conversation as something like someone wounded, someone weakened, and maybe lesser version of ourselves from the past. But the way you declared this topic is creating a healthy relationship with an inner child. So what is that inner child that we kind of all understand what it is, but also it's not really clearly defined in our conversation, in our public conversation.
So it's a part of us. And so we've already talked about kind of a critical part, a loving parent part, and then we have an inner child part. And I've been working with inner child for 17 years. I've been doing my own intensive inner child work. So I've worked with my inner child as an infant, inner child as a toddler, inner child as a teenager. So it's a part of self. And the way I like to think of it is that it's parts of self where things have happened, where we haven't been able to process it at the time. And we have the opportunity now to go back to that time with that part of self and be the support that that part needed in order that whatever got stuck there, got frozen, couldn't be processed, that it can be moved through, defrosted and processed. So and in that process, we're kind of growing the loving parent part. You might call it the higher self or the loving parent. To me, it's quite similar. We're bringing that part forward to care and attend to that younger part of self that often felt really alone and quite confused with whatever was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. So is that inner child constantly present in us? Because the way I understand to maintain a healthy relationship with the inner child, that means that, well, it's like our life's companion, no matter how long we work with it.
Yeah. So the way that I work with my clients is it's the most important relationship that we have. So more important our relationship with our partner, with our children, with our parents, it is the most important relationship that we have, because ultimately it's the relationship with ourselves. And I don't know about everyone else, but I know that I find that when I'm feeling congruent in myself, and I'm feeling connected and in balance in myself, and an important part of that for me is working with my inner child, that then everything else flows out.
Mm-hmm. So how can you assess your relationship with your inner child? I mean, is it good? Is it not good?
So one way to have an insight into how things are going with your inner child is to look at your own behaviors. And if there's a lot of addictive patterns playing out, that's a really sure sign that there's some inner child stuff happening. Frequent, strong emotions, a lot of dysregulation, that can be the inner child part of self asking for help in some way. Yeah.
A little bit, the thing that I'm asking, that I'm thinking of right now. So I believe we all have some kind of traumas and wounds from the past, which maybe we didn't get to work through. But we also, I mean, life goes on. Our child grows up by about 18, maybe a little later, at least the maturity part. And then life goes on and new traumas happen. Do all traumas have roots in the relationship with the inner child, or is something that comes later can be the fruit of you being grown up and supposedly mature and still having a trouble?
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. I mean, there can totally be traumas that happen as adults that can change the pattern of our whole life. And so you can still work with self as an adult, though, in a similar way to working with the inner child. So, I mean, I've worked with clients in their 60s who've been working with traumas and things that happened to them in their 40s. So it's not inner child as such, but it's still a part of self where something really traumatic happened that we were unable to process at the time. It's just for people, as soon as we start to, even I do a lot of somatic body work, and often when we start going in through the sensations in the body, and then often people start off with, oh, I've got a pain in my back and it's really tight. And I'm 5 years old standing in my bathroom and my father's shouting at me. And so often I find that somatic things, sensations in the body, when we go through them, will often come up spontaneously with a child part of self, with something stuck from the past.
So that experience where your body pain in the grown-up age is connected to some experience in the past when you were a child, how do you bring it up? Do you go through some kind of hypnosis or?
I don't know. So that example could easily happen through, like, a process I use a lot is called focusing, which is the foundation of somatic experiencing of all the somatic psychotherapies. And it's basically start off with a felt sensation in the body, and then we learn to attend to that felt sensation. So, and many clients will, start off sitting with that felt sensation and then have memories of things come up.
I'm sorry to ask that, but is it something which we could at least like have a taster of right now? Or is it too complicated? It's just so curious.
Yeah, I can give you a good book recommendation.
Yes, that would work as well. Yes.
It's too much to do on a live because we don't know where it's going to go.
Course. Yeah, I have no idea what this practice is about, so I just kind of guessed.
So a wonderful book is by somebody called Anne Weiser Cornell, and it's called The Power of Focusing. It's a purple. It's quite thin. It's a really easy read. I highly recommend it. And you can read that book and start doing it yourself or with a buddy. If you have a friend who wants to do it with you, even better, but you can do it on your own. Very powerful practice.
So, I'll circle back a little bit to the beginning of our conversation. We started with self-love in essence, and you were talking about the wise parent and the critical parent and the inner child. So theoretically, I can imagine and can even think of people who have had a pretty happy childhood, at least on the surface, at least no traumas from the past, and yet they don't seem to be loving themselves. Is that how is that connected? Is self-love really connected to your inner child relationship, or maybe they're just having the trauma which is undetected and they're not aware of it?
So I think we're going through a phase in Western psychotherapy where we're really redefining what trauma is. Time we think of trauma as a car accident, a bank robbery, being beaten by, an alcoholic parent. And that's what we think of as trauma. And what's coming to light is that there's a whole lot of trauma that's trauma through omission. So what we missed out on is also quite traumatic in many ways. So if you grow up and the only thing that was valuable about you were your grades at school, or the only time that you were ever given any attention was when you were performing as a gymnast. And so there are a lot of people who nothing traumatic in the normal sense of the word has happened to them, but their whole childhood, there's been no cuddling, no touch, or there's been no words of affirmation. Nobody has told them that they're just amazing for who they are. So there's a whole lot of attachment. I call it, it's called attachment wounding. There's a whole lot of attachment wounding that people are coming into adulthood with that they're completely unaware of. And it's only as adults when they go into adult relationships and they start to feel like, oh my goodness, I can feel that this relationship is not how I want it to be, or they're getting feedback from their partner that this relationship isn't going in the way that they'd like it to go. And then they start to delve into, okay, well, where has this come from? Why am I finding it hard to connect more deeply in my relationship?
So how do you start fixing the relationship with your inner child? How do you even get to know your inner child?
Question. Okay, a great way to do it is with a therapist, with somebody holding space for you, especially if there's been quite a lot of different kinds of trauma in your childhood. I have a course that I sell on my website, psychotherapycentral.health, that takes you through the stages of meeting your inner child. Basically those are two really powerful ways to do it, is through an inner meditation experience where you go inwards to meet your inner child. Now, the first time I did this and I met my own inner child, I thought I was going to be meeting, I expected like a cute 6-year-old with pigtails, you know, tied up in a little bow. My inner child was about 15 and she was wearing like fishnet stockings. She was smoking cigarettes, right, with a long cigarette holder. And she did not want a bar of me. She was just sitting on a wall. It wouldn't even look at me when I first met my inner child. She was so angry with me. And so you might think, oh, I'm going to do this practice, but then it's going to just feel like I'm just talking to myself. It's going to feel kind of made up. But my experience is with, I would say like 99% of my clients, that when they first meet their inner child, they're really surprised that they get something that actually they're not expecting. And so, like I had a client the other day, we went in and did some inner child work and she met her infant self. So she was a tiny little baby. Yeah. And I always pay a lot of attention to what is the age of your child when you first meet them, because I often find that there's some conscious or unconscious wounding or what we call like a stopped process around that age. There's something there often that age that they first come to you. So like for me, I had a lot of work to do with my inner child around that age, sort of 13, 14, 15. For myself, there was a lot of anger and rage around that age. So I had to do a lot of work with her around that period.
So I do have a personal question, then I'll ask a serious question. Did you actually in that age wear fishnet stockings and smoke cigarettes and huge...
Not at all. No. I had very strict parents and there was no way I was going out in fishnet stockings or smoking. But she probably would have liked to do that, you know?
I wonder then what would that visual mean? Can you explain what does that whoever that inner child that you meet first shows up like? Is there, what kind of information does it carry for you?
For me, it was a symbol of rebellion. She was showing me her rebelliousness. It was like, yeah, I don't care about you, get lost, I'm not listening to you. It was rebellion.
So that inner child, does that child age, or do you slide back and forth going to different ages? How does it work?
Yeah. Some people find it really helpful to use a photograph of themselves at a certain age, and they use that as kind of a gateway in. With most of my clients, I don't do that. We just drop into kind of a meditation and we go into a space to meet the inner child, and the inner child organically comes forward, and it can be any age. So if I'm working one-on-one with people is that they'll come in at different ages. So in one session, the child might be age 6, and in another session, they might be 14, and in another session 2. But I do tend to find, working ongoing with people, that there are certain ages that tend to pop up again and again and again. And that's because there's big stuff that happened there. And so there's different parts of that age that need to be revisited and held through. So with the inner child work is learning to hold self when we're in pain. Yeah. And that is the gift of taking it into our adult lives, is that when the child part of us gets triggered. Yeah. So it might be something that's happened now, like it might be our partner doing something that reminds us of how our dad treated us. And then our reaction is so strong. It's like an overreaction, and we know it's an overreaction, and we feel like, why am I reacting like this? Like, it's not appropriate for what just happened. And that's okay. There's a trigger. So something's been triggered, and then we get to drop into it. Okay, well, what's been triggered? And then we allow the inner child to come forward. Well, this reminds me of when dad did X, Y, and Z. Then we get to speak to the child about that. Okay, well, what was happening for dad then? What did you need then? We do that process with the child. And then what happens is that in the adult relationship, the energy shifts because the trigger is gone. So then it's like, oh, I understand why that happened. I understand it's like the emotional charge is gone.
I've noticed that there were questions that came in, and I do want to give people a chance to ask the question. So Bianca, you can see if anybody wants to join us. But meanwhile, I want to ask, so you said that it's good to work with psychotherapists to heal that relationship within a child, and you have also a program. But what if a person, would you advise doing it on your own? Is it possible even, or you do need some kind of reflection from another person to actually be able to properly do the work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say both, right? You can do it on your own. And I've had all of my clients say to me that when they do it together, it's stronger, it's more powerful, it feels more real. So I would say both. If you can, and I know therapy isn't available to everybody, if you can, doing it in therapy is the best way to do it. If you can't, do meditations, do courses, do it like that.
Yeah. Thank you. I can see that we have Bertha joining us. Hi, Bertha.
Hi, Bertha.
I think your sound is not on yet. So if you can switch on your microphone, I'll pass mine over to you. Yes, here
Hello.
you are.
Hello, how are you? I'm very happy to be back. This topic is very interesting, very important. And I guess the questions that I asked are, loving yourself too much. I just heard a podcast of Jay Shetty, and he's interviewing this lady, and I didn't like it, but then I finished it, and I have so many questions about it. You see, you can exaggerate loving yourself, but at the same time, maybe I don't know how to love myself. I thought that was very, very strange, not loving yourself. But I started accepting the idea that you really have to accept yourself and love yourself and so forth. But how much is too much? How do you become, how do you know you're not too selfish? You see, thinking so much about you, mainly if you're the center of your life, I don't know. That's my one question. The other question is about the inner child.
You can take it one by one if you don't mind.
Great.
So the first question I'm hearing is kind of, how do I love myself and be in relationship with other people who also have needs? Is that the question?
Yes.
And that is always a balance, right? Because when we're in relationship with other people, there is obviously love for self and love for the other. It's coming from a cup full place. So is my cup full enough to be able to give to others? Otherwise, what I give, I often give with resentment. Have you ever done that? Given with resentment because your cup's
No, I never do resentment. I love people. I give myself so much to the stream that I'm really not thinking about myself.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's beautiful. And do you ever find that impacts your own well-being?
I think in my case is I give myself too much to others, that I don't have enough time to really see my own needs. You see, and I want to know myself.
I'm sorry if I butt in, but I have a strange feeling that there is like a dilemma that if I give myself or my love to others, that means that I cannot love myself. Like if I love myself, I wouldn't be giving my love to others. I might be misunderstanding you, Bertha. I'm sorry.
When you have a purpose, you do it out of love. You see, my purpose right now is to help children, to be able to see, to just help them in any ways, mainly to think, mainly to grow. You see, mainly give them resources, or but I also have my own family and so forth. So my whole energy goes towards, it's wonderful. You see, I find so many people I get to know, but people need so much. You know, they are stuck in ways of thinking that is hurting them, you see. And so in that process, I am helping them. So, but I never thought about loving myself, you know, but I need to go back to my history. I need to find my myself in a way. But I have to tell you that when I see myself, I am not kind to myself, you know. But at the same time, I go back to my parents and I understand why, you know, I've been mistreated very badly and so forth, you see. So I am traumatized. So, and I think I'm trying to escape of, really, I'm afraid to go back to me.
Yeah, I feel that. So the inner child is a really powerful way to go back to me, actually. And the two core questions for your inner child when you check in with her are, how are you? And the next one is always, and what do you need? And so it's a really beautiful way there to, and you might even just think of it as like connecting with your own heart, Bertha, because it sounds like you've got such a beautiful heart, you know, the desire to give, checking with your own heart. If I was one of those children, so a girl in me, and I were to ask her how she's doing today, what would she say? Just imagine what she would say. And then thinking, okay, and if she was right here in my heart, and I asked, what do you need? What would she say right now? And just listening to her. And she might say, I'd love a glass of water. She might say, I want to go and play with the kids. She might say, I want to lay down and get a foot massage. Whatever she has to say, that can be a very powerful way of getting to know you in a different way.
You know, we are 98% unconscious, 2% conscious. Is the inner child in the 98%? How I've been, for years, I've been trying to find that, you know, how to increase your consciousness, how to, maybe in that process, I will go into myself, how
Yeah,
to.
That's a great point, Bertha. Yeah. The inner child is a really great doorway into the unconscious. Because sometimes our head will be saying, I need to do X, Y, and Z, but the inner child will have a different message.
Bertha, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Yes.
Nice to see you too.
I will ask actually a question, probably again as an afterthought of your conversation right now here. Why is it so hard for people to love themselves? It's maybe a strange question. Meanwhile, Bianca, if somebody else wants to join us, I know that there are questions coming in, and I know I usually don't give chance to a lot of people, but if somebody wants to join us while Jennifer is answering this question, why is it so hard for people to love themselves?
Yeah, I think it's a cultural thing that I think it's like we're fish in the water, that fish don't even know they're in the water. That's take on it. I feel like it's something that is cultural, that we're not even really aware of at the beginning. And that's why it's so important for us individually and culturally to have these conversations about self-love. And I'm so happy to see so much going on around parenting and how we parent differently, because that inner voice, how we parent ourselves, is then how we parent our children. The number of parents hear them say, you know, oh my God, I heard myself say something the other day and I sounded just like my mother or just like my dad. I promised myself I would never say that. And here I am saying it to my child. And it's because we have a tendency just to repeat the same stuff. So unless we start being quite conscious in shifting those scripts, we say the same stuff. And then our kids grow up with the same scripts that we had, and they do the same thing. So this is what's so exciting about the work for me, is that it's about shifting our consciousness, shifting the script so that we start to teach our kids something different.
I see Lolita, but I want to still ask a question. So if you don't mind, Lolita, I'll pass you the microphone a little later. I want to ask, since you've just mentioned children, I know you have 2 children, and we obviously got this inability to love ourselves through the generations. What would be the advice? How can we not perpetuate this problem? How can we teach our children to love themselves without the fear that it will be something unhealthy?
Mm-mm. Something really powerful I learned a few years ago, a while back, was when you give your children affirmations, are they conditional or are they unconditional?
Mm-hmm.
So a conditional affirmation sounds like, oh, that drawing is amazing. Wow, that's so special. So that's conditional. Can you hear it? Because it's conditional on the art being good, regardless if it is or not. And an unconditional affirmation sounds like picking them up after school and saying, oh, I'm so glad to see you. I've been looking forward to seeing you all day. So that's more about their presence, a sense that their presence, oh, when I see you smile, it just lights up my heart. For children, for a lot of my clients, when I see them, they haven't experienced those kinds of statements, but the kind of energy behind those statements, that feeling their parents just want to be close to them in a healthy way. So as an easy takeaway answer to that question, just around that simple conditional versus unconditional. And I think that there's a whole energetic shift as we start to embed those unconditional appreciations and unconditional loving of our children.
But is it still okay to compliment them on very well done art piece?
Of course. Yeah, of course. So to get a balance, and I mean, there is a dilemma around, and do you give them, if there's negative feedback, how do you give feedback? How do you discipline? How do you, and I think so many parents, we're kind of making it up as we go along, because my experience of parenting is that no 2 children are the same. And so it's like, for me, it's like watering a flower, every flower has a slightly different seed, and every flower needs a slightly different amount of sun, different amount of water, different amount of, and I see my job as a parent is to kind of try and, as best I can, give the right conditions that child needs to grow into the best version of their flower, without trying, you have to be a sunflower or you have to be a rose. So just allowing the child to kind of be their own flower, and to sort of shift with them, and hope that I'm giving them the right amount of water, and I'm not going to drown them, and the right amount of sun without burning them. And I think that's a tightrope that all parents walk, is doing that dance with your children. And that requires attunement, it requires that deep attunement and that listening to your child, and knowing that what they need when they're 11 is not what they need when they're 11 and a half. And being close enough and listening enough, but far enough away that they have space to grow into the flower they need to be.
Well, I love this answer, because it's like no foolproof, one size fits all. Here, do this and you'll be fine. We have Lolita joining us. I hope you are still with us, despite me taking up some more time. So if you're with us, do switch on your microphone, and if you can, a camera as well. That would be really great to see you. Yay, we have Lolita. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, my question is, while growing up, being criticized and controlled by parents, always felt a kind of, you know, not feeling confidence to talk in front of people, especially my own community people, because my father was very outspoken and very friendly and happy. So I wanted to be like him, so I can attract attention to myself, being one of the group and like that. So that kind of feeling still comes up on me when I have to speak something in front of my own community people. It's only in front of my own community people. Like when I'm talking to you or to people of different culture, I don't have that inhibition. But in front of my people, I suddenly think, oh, will I sound stupid? Will I not say the right thing? You know. So my heart starts to beat so fast. It just happened even yesterday, actually at a Shri Kumar, because a lot of Indians around there talking to him, and I had a question to ask, but I was pulling myself out. I said, no, let it be. I'll listen, you know. So I don't know why I get into that kind of situation even now at this age, not able to get out of it. It is something to do with my inner child. I know that, but how do I address that?
Lolita, that is just such a beautiful example, and thank you so much for bringing that. And I know that I resonate with your example, that I've had experiences like that, and I'm sure other people have who are listening. So thank you for being brave enough to share that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, so there's different ways to work with that, right? There's different ways in, and in this, just because our conversation here is around inner child, the way that through that paradigm we would work with that is we would just sort of flow back in time to those spaces where your child was with your father, and we would be with her during those times, and we would explore, how does she feel? How does her dad feel in that scene? And then we would help her to find a voice in that scene. We would help find some resolution there. And so what we're doing is we're bringing the part that you are now, this strong part that obviously exists because you're here having the conversation so bravely and confidently with us. And we would brave, confident part back to assist that part that's kind of going, oh, I'm feeling uncertain. I'm feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed, maybe a bit overshadowed.
Yeah.
We work with that part back then.
Okay. So that means I have to, growing up for many, many years, like I've been always controlled by men in my family. So I always was nervous to talk, like, is that the right thing I should do? I just keep my mouth shut and just be what I am. But as a mother for two daughters, I built up my confidence and I brought them to be such independent women in this world. I'm so proud of that. And they have taught me so much, and they brought in a lot of confidence in me. And I really appreciate for being that mother and they being my daughter in this lifetime. And that's how, I'm even moving forward in my life to be a coach actually. I'm trying to train myself to be a coach so that I can bring my life experience to other people and see if they can see that. And I'm really so fortunate to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, beautiful work. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And, again, inspired by your question, I have a follow-up question. Is it possible to raise healthy children if you haven't healed all your traumas with your own inner child? And since Lolita mentioned she's going to be a coach, I know we have this dilemma quite a lot. Well, I've been in personal growth for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of teachers, authors, speakers, coaches. They're all humans, regular humans, in the sense that they may be having their own hard times and traumas. Is it possible to do that work if you, and I'm again asking as a devil's advocate, because I'm a human as well with as many flaws as there can be, but is it possible to actually be of help to other people if you haven't sorted out your own mess?
Okay, so there's two different questions, because one is about parenting, and I mean, look, we're for me, we're all unfinished products, right? It's kind of like, as long as we're in a human body, I don't think we're ever finished, it's kind of and maybe there are some finished saints on the planet, I'm totally open to that, but I would say that for most people, that I certainly haven't reached the end, so it's kind of, I think it's like an ongoing exploration, and for me it's like it's like an exploration. It's kind of exciting, and what are we going to uncover? So I mean, I see a therapist ongoing, I see a healer and a therapist, so that I consistently do my own work as I'm working with other people, and I see a supervisor as well. And I think it's part of my own kind of duty of care to the people I work with, is to make sure that I have people I'm working with to show me what I might not be conscious of while I'm working with them, but also in the close relationships around me. So I'm consistently doing my own work, and I pray that I never feel that I can just stop, because I feel like it goes hand in hand. And I actually know energetically that as you do more of that inner work, you grow energetically. And part of the responsibility of that, as you work with more and more people, is to keep doing your own work to stay as strong and as clear as you can. Yeah.
And when it comes to children?
When it comes to children, I think we're all trying to be the best parents that we can possibly be, right? I mean, and I think we're doing that on a massive spectrum, you know, and I think that it is never, ever too late to start doing the work. You know, I've had parents in their 60s say to me, you know, I feel I messed it up. I can see now I totally messed up being a parent. Is it too late, Jen? And I just say, it's not too late. You know, they're still your children. And there's always part of even grown children who wants to have a better relationship with their parents. So it's never too late. It's never too late to start whatever piece of work you get called to do, whether it's inner child, whether it's, you know, yoga, whether it's spiritual type work. Like, all of it for me is wherever you're drawn, just go in that direction and just follow your intuition and start. Yeah.
I know we have to be finishing up, and I know there are a lot of questions coming in, but the time is coming up. I do want to ask this one question. But what if your not inner child, your actual child, is like your inner child that you met in the first instance, you know, wearing fishnets, smoking a cigarette, and refusing to even look at you?
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I literally had a child who was doing that with me, they're clearly asking for space because they're rebelling, right? And they're individuating. So I would really be looking at kind of giving them space whilst letting them know that I'm there as a loving, holding presence. So it would sound like I'm really getting that you need space and that you want to explore, you know, your body and what you can do with it. And just know that I'm here. And if you want advice, I'm here. And if you don't want advice, I will be quiet. But I know that I'm here, you know, and if you don't want to speak to me, speak to Auntie so-and-so, or speak to, and my hope is that there'll be a number of loving role models, so that as they start to look for other female role models, which is really natural, that they're not just looking to their peers, that they actually have people who are good friends of mine, who are aunts and grandparents and cousins, that they can look to for guidance. Because I, as a mother, I don't think that I know everything, or I'm going to have every single, you know, facet of what my children are going to need. You know, I expect that they're going to learn from other loving adults around them. And so I hope that they'd be able, if they can't bond with me in that time, that they can bond with other people who love them and want the best for them. And then there's a surrender with parenting, yeah? Where you control it. You can't wrap them up in cotton wool and lock them in a room. So there is a period where, you know, there is a surrender, and for me, it would look like a prayer for their well-being and that they're taken care of. Yeah.
It was such a beautiful answer. Thank you for this. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I'm really sorry, guys. I see there are so many questions that didn't get asked. Maybe I should work on my self-discipline and stop hogging the conversation. It is my conversation, though. So thank you, everyone, who joined me. I'm going to ask you guys who are online right now, traditionally, to leave a heart for my wonderful guests, or if you're watching it in recording under the video. Jennifer, if people want to work with you, how can they find you? Do you work with people with their inner children or not inner children? You obviously know quite a lot about parenting. Yeah, can you share?
Yep. So the main ways that I work, I do the inner child work, and I do a lot of somatic work. I do another therapy called EMDR, and I'm also an energetic healer. And I've spent many years qualifying there. So I have quite a lot of things that I do. My website is www.psychotherapycentral.health. You can find me on Instagram under psychotherapy.central. Yep, I see people one-on-one, and I have the inner child courses that I do, and another extended program called Relationship Cycle Breaker, which is for people who have been in relationships and they're seeing cycles show up. So you just go onto my website, have a look at everything that I do, and yeah, I'd love to connect through Instagram, through any way. But I just want to say, Christina, how I loved all your questions. I know you apologized a few times, like this is a little bit off topic, but actually it enriched the conversation a lot. So thank you for going off topic, for asking the questions where it's like, when we're trying to use this stuff, where it's kind of like, that dilemma between, the critic that sometimes can kind of push us forward, but it's kind of like, how do we actually push ourselves forward, but in a really loving, supportive way? How do we shift that? I think so many people are dealing with that. So it's such a great question. So yeah, the question, and I love your energy as well, Christina. I really feel your warmth and your curiosity. So thank you for setting up Mind Valley and bringing together such a powerful community of seekers, people who are clearly looking to change their consciousness. And that's super exciting. So well done with creating such a great community and great courses and books and all that you do.
Thank you so much for your kind words. I actually was planning to compliment you on your warmth and such a loving energy. I really enjoyed this conversation. I know it's probably pretty hard on you considering it's 2 a.m. now 3 a.m. So thank you so much for your generosity and for your love.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm actually feeling quite energized from the conversation, so I'll have to look at how I'm going to wind down to go back to bed. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bianca, behind the scenes. You're always having our backs. And I'll see you in a week. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.